All right. Hey, Alan, we are back again for episode number 4 of Avoid Crisis.
Wow. It's happening fast, isn't it?
It sure is. We are working along with our production company. We're actually getting episodes, recorded and canned, and then our production company is going to get them posted up, with their website, avoidcrisis.com. And we're going to be on various socials. All that stuff's coming up. So we'll have probably for the next episode, we'll be able to announce all of that part. We talked earlier about an overall agenda. We talked about some new activity in the banking industry. We talked about some IRS announcements. And then we talked about some of sharing with our listeners some of our own internal marketing and advertising stuff. But before we go any further, I got to start with the elephant in the room. What the heck is that thing around your neck?
Oh, are you talking about this? This?
Yeah.
This right here?
That red thing.
Yeah. Outside of this podcast, which certainly consumes all of our time, I do have other duties and responsibilities. And so today I'm working from home, as you would say. So this is just my working from home attire. Mm-hmm. I'm assuming you didn't get the memo.
I did not. No. I'm wearing a sweatshirt, man.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, from my alma mater. Woohoo! Go Huskies!
Oh, wow. How about
right.
that? The Huskies. All right.
There we go.
Yeah, I know that we're still in the NCAAs, the Final Four. I'm looking for the Huskies. I didn't see them. Any commentary there?
They didn't make it in. They didn't make it in the door, man. They're not at the dance.
Yeah, well, I'm sure that everyone's got their brackets pretty much all broken by now. So, this is the first year where none of the number one seeds came through. Yeah, kind of like some of the banks that we thought were number one. They didn't quite make it through. You know what I'm saying?
There you go. That is absolutely right.
Yeah.
Well, it's nice to see you in your work from home casual attire today.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. So you hit on banks and some of the stuff that they're going. Let's start there then.
Well, you were talking about you wanted to share with our viewers some of the things too, because we're trying to figure out this whole how do you do a podcast, right? We're not experts. We're experts in other areas, but not in podcasts, right? So, it takes a lot to start to bring something like this together. And, you mentioned the marketing strategy, and we talked about, we need to do things like maybe look at how we generate a greater list of viewers and subscribers. And I don't know. I checked with the back office today, by the way, right? And you may not know this because I just haven't had a chance to share, but we already have identified that Avoid Crisis is already marginally above zero in its subscriber list. So we are looking good. We've got the trend working well. We're looking to add more, obviously. We're going to have to do things like maybe invite some people here, maybe get to some maybe some kind of media type thing, like maybe some music or something like that. We'll have to do some things like that, but that's all planned, so.
Oh yeah. We've got some music, but let's talk about the invited guest part toward the end.
Okay.
We can talk about some of the promos we're thinking about for listeners. Do you want to do that now, or do you want to do that more toward the end? Because we were talking about some,
I'm looking
some
at
ideas
agenda.
of how to entice.
I'm not sure that that's on the agenda. From I thought we had a thing. You're not going to. Okay. Go ahead. Just tell me what you're thinking.
Well, I think this is a great example that in prepping for the podcast, we wanted to come across fresh and authentic and real, unrehearsed. That's exactly my point. Is that you and I, we talk about general concepts, but we don't share ahead of time like a script.
Yeah.
We don't really know where exactly the other person's going to come from on a particular topic.
But you do agree we have an implied fairness rule, don't we?
Yes. Right.
Okay.
Yeah. You're talking about the other part, everybody knows about Section 230, but there's a whole sections, other 200 sections in Section 100 of that
Sure.
act that deal with
yeah.
fairness and things. Yeah. There you go.
Okay.
Yeah.
But
Equal
still,
time,
I don't know where you're going.
equal time for all sides.
Yeah.
All right. So we'll save the marketing advert stuff for the end. Basically, what we were talking about is, what are we doing to try to help get more listeners involved, and to get them to share the word and build up the listener audience. So let's cover that at the end. Let's jump into some of the fun stuff that we were doing before, and we can. Oh, and the music. We had an interesting music piece. You want to start with that? That's kind of fun, actually.
Okay, I don't know where you're going, but let's go ahead and start with that.
Let's start with that. Well, so I had someone, as we're talking to people, I had someone drop something on that was pretty cool. Let's see here. I'm going to try to share it on the screen. So let me see if I can do this properly. All right, screen share, boom, and here, and here. And so there you go. So now you can see my screen, and we've got this guy going right here. And tell me if you can hear this music.
All right, go ahead. No, I'm not.
Can you hear it?
I'm not hearing the music. No.
Oh, I don't know how to make that come in. All right. So then.
But I think I do recognize that. That's a famous artist on Spotify, maybe.
Exactly. Let's see here how else we can do. Okay, I think I got a way to do this. Let me.
You might have to start it over because you're somewhere in the middle of the video.
I will start it over. Okay, here we go. Let me try.
Okay.
Can you hear this now?
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead. But all of a sudden it stopped. Yeah. Okay. We've got some technical challenges there. But it did look like that was a rather famous artist. I don't know if you've licensed that, we have to pay a royalty on it. I'm not sure. But again, we're in the early stages of figuring this all out. We're not exactly professing to be professionals in the technical merits of how you do a podcast. Maybe we should move on.
Yeah. All right. We'll move on. But next time we'll work out that audio. We'll let people hear what is hopefully going to become or evolve into our music for our podcast. That'd be kind of cool.
Yeah. The thing about it is that if we actually are able to get that whole thing called the internet and the website all up and running, somebody could actually go back and just see the progress that we've made, because it's about life, right? You make choices. If you're going in the wrong direction, you got to go, okay, we got to somehow move on to a different path. I mean, you want to avoid crisis, just think about that. I mean, what are the critical things about avoiding crisis? Whatever this crisis is, doesn't it all fit into the same kind of approach? Like, a crisis is the end point, but there's a lot of things that happen to get to that end point. What can the listeners really be thinking about, just as almost a methodology?
Yeah, I would frame it this way. I would say, a crisis is something that requires urgent action or attention, and you can mitigate that impact through evaluation, analysis, scoping out, identifying, but then you have to make a decision. The choices must be made. Prioritizations have to happen. And then once you've analyzed and decided, then you have to act. You got to do something. And if you go with those 3 steps, and like you said, constant improvement, constant, adjustment. You're not always, if you're facing the wrong way, you got to change direction. And so it's a continual process. It's not a singular event. But if you keep at it and you're identifying what are some potentially big risk or opportunity factors, you will avoid crisis by being prepared. But the first step is to be aware of issues. And I think that's what we're trying to bring to our listeners, is an awareness of issues. It's a thought process, and it's getting people started down the path to avoid crisis.
So let me jump into something like right off the bat here, because it's been bothering me a bit. We talked in an earlier podcast about the FDIC and the guarantee. And there's been a lot of, we heard Congress, bringing in regulators and saying, hey, what happened? One thing about the guarantee is we know the 250,000 limit. Now, if you were, with a spouse, that goes up to 500. But there's a lot of people out there that have uninsured deposits. And if you look across the entire country at the uninsured deposit level, what I'm wondering about is, we heard, hey, everything is guaranteed, but what would it take if you did guarantee everything? How much of the GDP would that represent? And then what would that do to the U.S. if, in fact, everyone took their money out of the bank? And, in fact, the government guaranteed it. What would happen to the U.S.? What would happen to the dollar? What would happen to the world if that happened? Because, the question is really directed at financial stability, which we are now being told, these are one-off events. SVB, Signature Bank, these are all contained at this point, right? We are seeing that the market thinks that maybe it's, go ahead now. Maybe, the Fed is going to start to pause, maybe even lower rates. But think about, just from a guarantee standpoint, what ends up happening to the citizens of the U.S. if, in fact, there was, we don't even have to go to 100%, but just that there was, like, say, 25% of the banks went through a similar experience of like a run. What would end up happening? And you're getting the backstop of the government. What's going to happen overall? Just a thought.
Well, so what you're driving at here in Fed speak is M1, M2, M3, right? Where M1 is the sum of all the currency held by the public. Now, part of the fundamental assumption of our banking system is that not everyone is going to want all their cash out of their demand deposit accounts at the same time. That there's going to be an ebb and flow, that some people are going to be pulling money out, but some people are going to be putting money in, and that you're going to have this, minor up and down. And it's the typical run on the bank, right? And if this happened, so if it happens at a single bank, we have singular problems. If it happens with a class of banks, they talked about the regionals and the community banks. That gets a little more of a scale of a problem. If it happens across the entire sector, I think that's nuclear. That's the only way they're going to get around that is they better get those printing machines, the printing presses humming 24/7 and on overtime and high speed. They got to print a bunch of Benjamins. And then what are people going to do with this stuff? They're going to stick it under the mattress? They're going to leave it in a storage unit? What are they going to do with it?
They did something. If we look at the numbers, because we saw a lot of flight to the higher capitalized banks. And that's just meaning not necessarily that they had higher capital overall. It's just that they're a larger bank. But we saw out of regionals into the larger banks a lot of flow. What we didn't see, though, was one-to-one flow. We saw some money going into them, but money went elsewhere. Maybe it was CDs, maybe it was money market funds, maybe it was between the mattress. But what it shows is a lack of 100% confidence in the banking system, and probably deservedly so, right? Watch your balances. You should be doing that anyhow, but I don't know if you've ever had anything happen in your bank where you looked at something and said, oh, that's not right. I'm going to have to call the bank, and something got into my account that didn't belong. I mean, we've heard about that happening to people, right? They get a deposit in their bank. They're like, oh, that's not anything I was expecting. And then they go spend it. And, there's a point of, there's this decision that got made, put you into a bad position, right? But it also goes back to the whole, we should be monitoring the risk, and we should be making decisions about what do you do with the uninsured deposit. Now, I know in a prior podcast, I mean, you were saying, look, it's been too long since the FDIC raised, and it's time to do it again. Maybe why not double it? 500 per individual, $1 million for joint couples.
Yeah, I agree. I think that they got to raise that limit.
Look, our politicians have no problem spending money. Why don't we jump in there and tell them how to do it? Give us a more deposit insurance. Yeah. Sure.
Yeah. Well, and FDIC is technically independent, right? It's not taxpayer funded. FDIC collects premiums from the participatory banks. Mm-hmm. And obviously the banks are out in our capitalist system to make a profit. So it's a cost to the bank. So that the bank has to turn around and somehow extract that back out of the consumers, right? Into higher fees, wider spreads on interest rates of what they pay versus what they charge, et cetera. So, they're going to get it from the public, but just not a tax technically.
Yeah. Let's stay in the line of the FDIC, who had the mandate to try to deal with these banks. What did we just have happen? We talked about it last podcast. We said, hey, this weekend, something's going to happen. Let's go ahead and update everyone on what did happen from the actions of the FDIC.
Right. Well, we have buyers for Signature and SVB assets. Do they know what they got? I mean, what did they get? Right. And what is the value of that? And value and what they paid are two different things, right? So they probably paid lower than true value because it's essentially a fire sale, right? So, and theoretically, you're supposed to get a deal when you do that kind of a thing. So, all right.
Did the FDIC get a deal, at least with SVB? Isn't there an upside kicker that went along with the deal?
I'm not aware. I haven't dug through that level of details. Yeah. Okay. I was just going to say, help me out here, man.
Sure. No. So what happened is that, we have this bank coming out of Raleigh who is one of two bidders. The other bidder says, I need a greater discount. FDIC says, you're not the number one deal. Here's a bank that is. And on top of that, for kind of executing the sale, think about it. If you go through a big M&A, there's a banker there somewhere who's going to get a fee, right? So the FDIC is like, look, we're putting this all together. If it turns out that, the discount was too much or whatever, we should get a little bit back, sweeten the pot for us. And I'm like, well, hey, what about those equity holders who are basically taken down to zero? They're not getting any of that piece of the upside, whatever that is. And especially if we look back at this and go, all right, what if, as this whole SVB bank run, if we want to call it that, and maybe there's other reasons why it was triggered, maybe it could have been triggered earlier, it was a risk, right? But what if before this really started to happen, where there was this acceleration? Because remember, it was like news came out Wednesday, Thursday, a lot of people taking money out. People saying, get your money out now. All of a sudden, it's breaking on the internet. You can't get any access to your funds. You don't know what's going on. And it's not until later that we get the guarantee of the uninsured deposits beyond the $250,000 or the $500,000, depending on what you were, single deposit or a joint deposit. So what ends up happening is they guarantee. What if they guaranteed, like, hey, on Wednesday, we've already been planning for this. We've already looked at this. We know that this bank was in an issue, and we're prepared 100% to backstop. And depositors, you don't have to run. We're going to figure it out. We're going to go ahead. We're going to put them up for sale, but we're not going to have this. Does potentially this change the whole what we've seen? Because, are we at the end or not? Because we're arguing, at least the market is arguing that, it's a one-off. We've got to contain now. we're not going to see it again, at least for a long time, because now we know. Like, did we not know, like, back in 1900s that there could be a bank run? You know, did we not know?
Right.
I mean,
right.
And so again, what has changed here is not the risk. It's the awareness of risk. And think about it from the point of avoiding crisis. What are you going to do with your overall investments? What are you going to do with your cash if you happen to be fortunate enough to have more cash than the limits? You know, I mean,
Right.
What are you going to do? What you could do, and it'd be great if you were, is saying, you know, even though some people might think that this is a challenge to do, I'm going to go ahead and give away all of my uninsured deposits to worthy causes. That way I don't have to worry about losing that money. Somebody else will have it. They can put it to good use. Does that make sense? No. Does it make sense to, no on one answer. On another, yeah, you certainly should be donating to worthy causes. Okay, that's the yes. But the no is like, no, think about it from what else could you do with that money? If you're trying to avoid the crisis of losing your money in a financial institution that is insuring, what do you do with that excess money? Is there any planning strategies, or is that part of what you need to be thinking about? Do I need a financial planner to avoid crisis? I mean, maybe that's something to be thinking about.
All great points. I want to hit on a couple things that you said in there, and that is, what's the difference between what happened, decades ago, the one of the first bank runs, during the crash and all that, and other bank runs that have happened over time, versus now. And honestly, it's technology, it's social media, and it's smartphones. You can move millions of dollars with just a couple of punches on your phone wherever you're at. In the old days, you had to line up on the sidewalk outside the door of the bank. Remember, good old It's a Wonderful Life. He was waiting for 3:00 when the thing, so he could lock the doors and say, we're closed for we're closed for the day,
hey,
right?
By the way, I'm going to go ahead and extend an invitation, not to cut you off here and to derail the conversation, but you just happened to mention Jimmy Stewart, and I got to say, I'm going to give you an invitation to go to the Jimmy Stewart Museum. Okay.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, you probably even know that there existed one. Happy to have them, send us their materials. We certainly can, provide a link to their location. A lot of people don't know that, but it's a wonderful life, certainly, that we're living in today as well. Meaning, like, some of that you just said, that picture, think of that image. You have all these people lined up outside of the bank because they need a teller. Okay, and you just talked about how things have changed. Talk about how technology has changed things. That teller is now electronic for many people. So instead, what you would have to do to represent this is you'd have to have a lineup of phones all over outside of this, recipient of the electronic exchange. I mean, that's today's world. And if you think about it, there's this other whole set of electronic receivers, which are the larger banks saying you want to switch it out of here and put it over here. We can do that in a second. You don't have to sit there and be in line and wait to get to the teller. People can access multiple tellers. And so what you have is you have this rush to be the first one out. And if you are, effectively, the good money that's left in the bank, right, eventually runs out. Now they have nothing more to provide unless there's this new provision of cash, which in this case came from the FDIC, from the government, right? Ultimately, if this is the backstop, how's that going to get paid for? If the government's providing that, what exactly happens? Is it just a temporary thing? Does the bank pay it back? Do we need to have some kind of change in regulations and, capital requirements? I mean, I'm sure by now I've derailed you from, throwing up a bunch of other things. So take notes.
Yeah, no, we should. They're great points because it all affects what the FDIC and the Fed needs to do to avoid crisis, right? To give confidence in the market to not freak out and do stupid things. Part of it is, I think, raising the FDIC insurance limit. The other part of it, I think, is that to put everyone on notice that, oh, look, we're going to raise it, say, to 500,000. but you need to maintain banking relationships with more than one bank. You want to somewhat limit your uninsured deposit exposure. In other words, the amount of deposits that are over the FDIC limit. It's now incumbent upon the consumer to take action, right? You've now been informed. So there's a lot of adjustment that's going to happen and in behavior, and it's being driven, think, by technology. How's this thing going to run out or play out in the long run? Look, we had 15 years of essentially zero interest rates. They're now significantly higher than that. And they may even go up another quarter, half point or so, maybe a whole point before this is all said and done and they start dropping again. Who knows? Exactly. But the fact is that they're significantly greater than zero. So if you bought long-term bonds that are tied to these low interest rates, or treasuries that are tied to these low interest rates, your face value, your fair market value is below your face value on these bonds. You have unrealized losses sitting on your balance sheet. And until you can wait for that to come to maturity, it'll kind of work its way out. But if you don't have that time, you're going to have to sell. You have to recognize those losses. And so this is another reason why the Fed opened up that special program where the banks could go get money at favorable rates and basically almost like turning in their treasuries for current rate treasuries or something like that. And it's all these things combined. But I think one of the points that you're kind of hitting on is that at the end of the day, the regulators and the Fed can do all they want about this stuff. If we don't have public confidence, and if the masses run on the system, this system will collapse. It was never designed for a system-wide run on the banks, plural, on every bank. So that's kind of my opinion on that, is that we got to get people to understand how the heck this thing works. It's not like they take your money in your checking account and they have it sitting over in the corner. Oh yeah, these are the 20s and 100s and 50s that you came and deposited the other day, right? It doesn't work like that.
And they're exactly these same ones. I got the serial numbers here. Could you give me those back? I know I gave it to you. You said it was going to be safe. You're holding on to it. Here's my serial numbers. Please, can you just give me, I want that $5 bill with this, because otherwise I don't know what you did with it.
Give me my money back.
Yeah, give me my money back. Okay, but speaking of that, you made a really great point. And I want to go back to it because what you said, I think is just really easy for our listeners to miss, because you make comments that are just really insightful, and it makes me think about something. So you said earlier in the podcast today, what did the buyer get? And so we're talking about Signature Bank, and we know that there were like issues with crypto there because they had a lot of investments there, right? And then with SVB, we knew that they were really involved in the innovation world. And now there is a perceived gap of the lender of choice right now. Perceived gap of who do you go if you're a startup? Where do you go?
Yeah.
Right. Who do you get help from? Right. And who do you get lending from? And, there's only so much money that you can get from who you know, and maybe you need more. So you need a VC, you need an angel investor, you need a loan, or you're giving out equity, whatever it is, in order to, really be able to continue to develop the innovation path you're on, you need to have a source of funding. So in this purchase, what did the buyers get? And so one of the things I thought about was, well, what do we know? What's public information? So I started to look into the SEC filings, and I saw that there was a filing here from SIVB, which is the company here, SVB Financial Group, and it was SIVB. So this is including everything in SVB. And we don't know exactly how these assets were structured. We haven't seen the details on the the equity appreciation rights that go to the FDIC. We haven't seen a lot of these details. Maybe we will. Maybe it'll be kept out of the public eye for a while, but eventually we'll get an idea of what's happened. But looking at this SEC filing and just kind of going through and just trying to understand what is this entity and what was involved, it seems kind of complex. And
which one?
Where,
are we talking signature or SVB at this point?
No, I'm talking about SVB.
What entity? Okay, SVB. Okay, I just want to be clear for
SVB. So SIVB is, if you go to the www.sec.gov, you can go in and you can search on any company that's publicly traded, which SIVB was. So you can go in there and you can find their filings with the SEC. And right now we're at the annual period filing, which is called the 10K. So I went and looked at the 10K and I started to go looking through there and trying to understand just what is this company. And I was like, people ask about fair value. So I just typed up in the search box, fair value. 257 references in this to fair value. 257. Now, what is fair value? It's a tough question. It really represents the price that a willing participant in the market would give you. What is the market we're in right now? And the thing is that, financial statements are as of that point. Okay. Would you look at their indications of fair value the same way now that we know what they've gone through? We have this discount. So obviously the willing buyer needed to have some sort of incentive. But there was another thing that really kind of stuck out at me. And the reason why it stuck out was that it reminded me of something that I saw clear back in the financial crisis. In the financial crisis, back in 2008, there was this whole question about fair value and how we should be marking financial instruments. And what was happening was that the way the financial rules were at the time is you had to look at the market as an observable price. So as it turned out, if, for example, you were seeing that the market prices were going down, and you had to keep marketing to it, having your marks go to that, you were going to continue to show that you had this unrealized loss that you talked about. Ultimately, what ended up happening was, I think you remember because you were there whenever Financial Executives International had me come and do a speech there, and I talked about FAS 157, how it was a troubled solution, how this marketing or this mark to market was really causing some issues when especially the banks or other holders in financial institutions were going to hold to maturity, and they were going to continue to hold. And why would it be that, like, for example, some other participant who could come in and just take the risk of selling first and having to buy later, as an example, shorting, if they would continue to short, you had to continue to mark going down, but was it real? And so that was, really a call for, Congress to step up. But in that whole process and doing some of the research, I found a footnote. And this footnote reminded the Financial Accounting Standards Board, the FASB, who really set their mandate. And it was like, hey, if you guys aren't getting the accounting rules right, we don't have to call you guys the FASB anymore. We don't have to rely on you anymore. Now, we have international financial standards, right? We have U.S. GAAP that we call it, generally accepted accounting principles here in the U.S. But you think about that, saying that sometimes these rules that are out there lead to unintended consequences. We also have the entire SEC requirements, and the SEC requirements tell you have to have fair value. It doesn't say you have to go and just create one footnote and say, here's how we do fair value across the board. Because, there are things like the fair value option. I know this is getting a little bit too detailed, but you could take a loan, for example, and elect the fair value option. Potentially, you might have, amortized cost on it. But anyhow, taking a look at this, I looked at their 10K. This is, SVB. And I think if your page count is the same as mine, and you go out to, I think it's here, page 79.
Page 79 of what?
Of the 10K.
No, but
of the
how
10K, yeah.
many total, right? So that people can know that they're looking at the same 79 of how many? Does it say total page count there?
Yeah. It's a good point. I got 181. So
okay,
so
it's somewhere page 79
So
of 181 on SVB's 10K.
Calculating.
Most recent.
Yeah. You want to do the math? Go ahead.
So go look. Okay, so reading the footnote. Right. This is great stuff. I love it.
Okay, let me tell you what this is about. This is about derivatives. Okay.
Right.
It's derivatives. Okay, so you know what a derivative is. It's just an underlying of something else. Like you want to bet on a little league game. I mean, I learned about derivatives when I went to Las Vegas. So the answer was I have the opportunity, and it's a binary option. I put a dollar in the slot, and Las Vegas keeps it. I learned that the binary option was your return is zero. Okay, so I got that. So, but a derivative is just basically saying that its value will change based on the outcome of something else or the movement of something else. Very, very complex area, in the accounting guidance. I mean, people love topic 815. They talk about it all the time. I don't know. You're out in the public, you hear people talking about it all the time. Topic 815 derivatives, right?
Everywhere. Supermarket line.
You don't, right? So here's the thing. There's this little footnote. So the derivatives talks about assets, and in those assets it has equity warrant assets, contingent conversion rates, foreign exchange contracts, total return swaps, client interest rate derivatives, interest rate swaps, comes up to a total gross derivative assets, and then it subtracts netting adjustments. It has this little footnote there, 1. Netting adjustments. Okay, so here's the footnote.
Can you, at some point, give us a quote, end quote, and then an explanation.
Okay.
Here. So what's the quote, end quote, and then the explanation?
So it says less netting adjustments, and then it has the parenthetical reference of number 1. So I go to number 1, and here I'm going to read it, and I'm going to start with quote and end quote. Quote: during the third quarter of 2022. We changed our accounting policy to report the fair values of our derivative assets and liabilities subject to ISDA, which is called ISDA. So subject to ISDA master netting arrangements on a net basis where a right of set-off exists, period. The net derivative fair values have been further adjusted for cash collateral received / pledged. The change in accounting policy was applied retrospectively, and prior periods have been revised to conform with current period presentation. End quote. So that says that there's a retrospective adjustment.
Yeah.
I find that interesting because I don't know what it was. I don't know what it means. I'd like more information. If I'm in the seat of the SEC, who's in the middle of an investigation right now, I'd be like, tell us about derivatives. What are they? What's this right of set-off all about? Because they have a footnote here. I just don't know what it is. But I was just pointing that out. Yeah, I mean, because right now, going back to what you're talking about, what is the buyer getting? They'll know over time because they'll either get paid back on these items, they'll be exposed to additional risk, they absorb the risk, they'll potentially even have to give back because it turns out to be a good deal, which it could be. It's just a matter of when you get into these situations with such a large organization with such high values of assets and liabilities, how do you go about it? And especially whenever you look at some of these things and you go, what is a contingent conversion rate? Just I don't know. I mean, does that allow me? Am I allowed to? Go ahead.
That retroactive adjustment with regard to fair value accounting, boy, that just leaves so much opportunity for manipulation, right? So I think that it's definitely an area worth digging into. No doubt, to your point, we're going to hear more about this over time. And there's just a bunch of stuff like this when it's like CSI going to the crime scene. They got to look at all the evidence, and they're gonna piece together the story of what, theoretically actually happened. And but it's going to take time, right? And it's stuff like this footnote. where they're going to take a thread and start pulling on it. You never know where it's going to lead you to. But earlier in your last segment there, you raised a point about where a lot of these companies are going to go now, and Silicon Valley Bank. They cater to and primarily work with startup companies, technology companies, biotech, fintech, a lot of clean energy stuff. I mean, a lot of cutting edge, innovative companies and ideas and technologies. And now that we're in a rising interest rate environment, now that it's harder to borrow money, it's harder to get money. Money is more expensive. When money's basically free or very cheap, it's easy to throw it around. So there were companies that were getting funded that maybe should not have been getting funded in that zero interest rate environment. But now are we entering a phase where we're going to go the other direction? And the pendulum always swings, right? It always goes a little too far, then has to come back, and a little too far the other way, then has to come back. And are we now going to swing the other direction to where there actually are companies that had good technology, good innovations that are not going to get funded, and their technology is not going to see the light of day, and we're going to have an air bubble essentially going through our economy of innovation for the next, say, 12 to 18 months, while money is going to be really tight. And what's that going to mean 3 to 5 years from now on the global economy, but also with the U.S. relative to the global economy, right? So we got some issues coming up that are going to be I don't say derivative risks. I mean, not in the technical sense, consequential.
But, yeah, I mean, like we talked before, tentacles, right? We expressed that it was like tentacles. Like it starts here and it kind of reaches out, because I don't think that we've fully seen the impact of FTX as an example. People paid that money. Let's just assume that everybody didn't really need that money, that they were so wealthy that if they lost 85 million, well, they had, 200 million that they could easily, back them up beyond that. So it was just, not as material to them as maybe it would be to, a company that depended on that as their lifeline to survive. But think about that. If that money was lost, where did it go? Who made the money? Was there somebody on the other side of that? Because if you think about it, if I bought it for this, there's somebody that sold it, right? I mean, the risk changed somewhere. So Is it just, where did it go? I don't know. I mean, that's one to watch. FTX, I don't think that all the ripple through the system is done there. I don't think all the ripple through the system relating to these bank sales and their assets is done. Now, where is it going to pop up? Or what's the other impact? I mean, we're getting the comfort. And I think we talked about this earlier about, isn't this the playbook? First of all, it happens. The government jumps in, says, it's okay now. We figured out what's wrong. Yep, we're all good now. Let's go forward. But, I mean, we saw very shortly after FTX, SVB, and Signature Bank that Credit Suisse, who'd been around for a long time, all of a sudden goes UBS, right? And how does that happen? It had been troubled for a long time, but there was fear, and the contagion risk was there, and there's fear around the world. And, where else is it going to pop up?
Yep. No, there's a lot of ripple effect, and I think time will flush this out. These timing differences in rising interest rate environment. I think people have to be patient. It's going to be tough. We're entering recession. People are already pulling back. We talked about companies not getting funded, and that translates into real jobs, right? So there's a lot of there are some rough waters coming up, right? So to avoid crisis, be aware of that,
right,
in how you manage your balance sheet, right? You should be monitoring your cash very carefully, cutting back on some spending, conserving cash, and only funding those opportunities that are bringing you maximum return at this point. To get through the recessionary crisis that's going to be coming up. it reminded me of another topic. Can we pivot here and go to a next one?
Segue.
Segue. So we had talked earlier also about how people have the crisis when it comes to tax time. Right? Oh my God, I got to file my tax returns. I got to get all my stuff together. It's just the once a year fire drill, and and then it's also paying your taxes. Right? It's the cash flow related to that. Well, I think it's worth, and we're gonna hopefully we get this posted up real soon here within a week. We got a call later today with our production company, but the IRS is in response to the floods, mudslides, rain. Just California got hammered here since January, honestly.
Sure.
So FEMA declared federal disaster zones for a number of counties in California, and the list kept growing. The recent count is 44 counties in California. And I think there's like 52 or 53 total counties in California. Yeah. So the majority of California, and it's all the big ones, a lot of the coastal ones and so on, right? Federal disaster zones. So immediately behind that, that's FEMA does that. Right behind that, Department of Treasury, the and then within that, the Internal Revenue Service announced that within those 44 counties, all taxpayers get an automatic extension of time to pay and file their taxes from April 15th to May 15th. And then the rain kept coming and the problems kept happening and more counties got added. And they finally, just a few weeks ago, announced, all right, all taxpayers in all of these 44 counties, not May 15th, it's now October 16th is the deadline. So any deadline that you had to pay or file income taxes, all types of taxpayers, and you're in one of these 44 counties in California, you now have until October 16th. What does that include? January 15th was the deadline for the fourth quarter 2022 estimated payment. That's pushed off to October. April 15th, that's the deadline to file and pay for 2022. Or an extension, and to pay your 2023 first quarter estimated payment. Deadline's now October 16th. June 15th, that's your second quarter 2023 estimated payment. That's not due June 15th anymore. That's due October 16th. And then September 15th is the third quarter estimated payment that would normally be due September 15th. That's now due October 16th. So you're going to have almost like a year's and no penalties or interest if you wait till that deadline. So, it's great. It gives us more time. Don't squander that time. Still get your documents together. Get your, you should still pencil out your return. Have an idea of what this number is going to be so you have visibility. Now we get to start talking about, well, what are you going to do with the cash flow? Right? And this just presents opportunity. So, what would you advise to our listeners who find themselves in this situation now, where they've got essentially a year's worth of tax deadlines pushed out to October 16th, roughly more than 6 months away?
First of all, going back to what we talked about before with a financial planner would be a really good person to talk to. And what they would say most likely is they'd say, you got to make sure that you have this amount available. How are you going to guarantee that you're not going to go spend it somewhere else because you think that's more important and you're thinking, well, when the time comes for me to pay this, I can't. I think you have to look at it like it's an opportunity, but you have to look at it as though it's spent money. You might be able to go and perhaps like put it into a good financially stable investment, like maybe a CD, making sure that you have the deposit insured, et cetera, so whatever that is. But yeah, there might be some opportunities for return. So, we're coming up here on the time. There was one other thing I wanted to do. We had talked about this before, where we were going to potentially go through a process of, on every podcast, invite potential guest, you know?
Yeah.
And so I've come up with 3. I don't know if you have any. If you don't, I can go ahead and just go with what I've got. And what we're going to do is in our little, website, whatever, once it's up, we'll have who was invited. And then we're going to use our marketing strategy for them to be able to join, right? So we'll just kind of continue with and we'll talk about this in the next podcast, I think, but we'll talk about that well-defined marketing strategy we have, which some people call it word of mouth. But anyhow, we're really focused on trying to get people who can come in and really add something to the topic and talk about avoiding crisis. So I'm going to give you my 3 people that I'm inviting to the podcast. And we don't have to say why, but I'm just going to tell you who they are. Okay. Number 1, Sharon Stone. Number 2, Spencer Lee. And number 3, a guy named Shaquille. Okay.
Shaquille O'Neal. Wow, what a diverse list.
Okay.
So do I get to ask any questions?
No, no, they're just on the list because they don't have to they can contact us. We're happy to share with where we're going on this, right?
Sure. All right,
but there's something that's tied to avoid crisis, or they wouldn't be invited, right? Why would you invite them when we're not? Yeah, right. Okay, so do you have any?
Yeah, I'd put it at the top of my list. I would put Warren Buffett.
Oh, good.
He's the Oracle of Omaha. Looking for investment opportunities always, and obviously hugely successful at what he's been doing for many years. I would try to find someone in the technology space. I haven't figured out who this person is yet, because it has to be someone that I respect.
Yeah, you know what? If you don't have the names, it just takes too much time. So next time, come in with your names. I'll let you do a carryover, a rollover. We'll call it just like a 401k rollover. So we can talk about that sometime. But let's do a rollover. Okay, so.
Here's my second one though. I want someone from the investment world. I want someone from the technology world, and I wanted someone from the banking world. So on the banking world, I'm going to say Jamie Dimon.
Okay. Well, so we're going to have to get those invites posted. But once again, Ray, I can't believe that we're at the end of another podcast. It just seems to go by so fast. Let's work on the music part, okay?
We're going to work on the music part.
Yeah, let's get some technical advisors here.
Right, and we'll get some tech support here. I do want to throw out though that avoid crisis. It's intended to expand beyond just financial. We talk a lot about financial topics. It tends to be our background, but also what finally inspired us to get off our butts and actually start to try to do something here. But it reaches beyond just the financial markets and business, and it could be personal finance. It could be other personal matters like trust and estate. It could be things like elder care, with the aging parents, that it's happening to a lot of people. We could talk about healthcare in general. We could talk about climate. So many things.
You know what?
Right?
We've got a lot to talk about. And in our next podcast, we can start talking about that, because right now I've got to go.
All right. So we want listeners to hit us with ideas, and we want our listeners to invite their friends to listen in.
That's right. We're going to go with that, because eventually someone who knows someone will eventually be able to invite those people, or let them know they're invited, and they'll come on the show. All right.
Sounds great.
Thanks again, Ray.
All right. Thank you, Alan. See you next time. All right. Bye-bye.
Okay.